This recording is to go over the topics covered in the first session of the Power Up with PowerShell study group from the Houston OWASP chapter. You can take a look at all of the OWASP related information on OWASP.org, and then the chapter pages. You can go to chapters and then drill down to North America. You could see a number of different Texas chapters. Here we are in Houston. We could see the study group restarting July 9th every Wednesday. Also a link to our study group, the Meetup RSVP, where you would go through, sign up. Today we're going to be starting to look at Windows PowerShell 5.1. We're going to be using Visual Studio Code. So you can go to codevisualstudio.com. If you go to the docs, and then over on the left side, you could see there's a setup, different operating systems that are available to you. I'm on Windows, so I'm going to choose that. Notice there are different options on here. You can have the direct link, or you can go through and use one of the download Visual Studio Code pages. There's a difference between the user setup and the system setup. So system does require elevated privileges, and it's going to put it under program files. Okay. It does allow you to provide all users with the ability to then leverage your VS Code. You'd go to your download page. Notice here, see either your user installer or your system. You choose the right one for you. So I've already downloaded that on this system. I'm going to go ahead and launch the VS Code setup. It's a very quick setup. Accept the license agreement. You can say whether or not you want to create that start menu folder. I normally create my desktop icon. Then you kick off the installation. It's pretty quick, and while we're seeing this install, the next thing we're going to do is take a look at how we can leverage PowerShell with VS Code. So back over to the docs as soon as we've launched VS Code here. So here's the default with VS Code. Came up correctly. Let me go ahead and close that. The other thing I'm going to do on this system, just to make it a little bit easier, notice that I already have Notepad++ installed. This way I can associate any number of files with it just to be safe. So any PowerShell scripts, batch files, command files, Python, SH for the shell, really anything that you want to, and associate JSON, XML, anything that might potentially run, you could just associate those with Notepad++. Over on the Visual Studio page, if I go to Docs and then over to Languages, because it's not listed here by default, under Languages, then we can see PowerShell. PowerShell, we're going to go through and select the Microsoft official PowerShell extension, bring up VS Code. So I'm just going to go ahead and pin that to my start, same way with Notepad++. If I just bring it up normally, notice I don't see it's running as an admin. If I did want to bring it up as an administrator, because there are some things that you would want to have the ability to run it as an administrator, then you would want to make sure you launch it that way. Some things like restart services, stop services, other privileged operations come to mind. Right now, I don't have anything opened up, so I'm going to go ahead and go over to the extensions. By default, you see installed and popular there. I'm going to go ahead and choose PowerShell. Once I have PowerShell, make sure it's Microsoft. Kick off that installation. It's then going to provide me with several different options. Notice it pops up saying that it wants me to install the new version of PowerShell, PowerShell 7, but we're going to just stick with PowerShell 5.1, Windows PowerShell 5.1, just because that is what is installed on servers. Once I have that installed, I can then change over. And what I normally do is go through and just choose my installed so I can see that. If there are any updates, so here I can see there's a code update. I'm going to go ahead and run that. The other thing I want to do right now is show you where Windows PowerShell is. So on Windows servers and Windows desktop systems, for many years now, it has been the default installed. So we could see here is Windows PowerShell, and then x86, older version, PowerShell ISE. Now what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and run Windows PowerShell just as an administrator. Again, I see the prompt about a newer version of PowerShell being available. I'm going to go ahead and update VS Code behind the scenes. Once I have VS Code with the PowerShell extension, I can then go to my preferences, go to my themes, choose my color theme, and I'm going to switch over to PowerShell ISE because that's what I've gotten used to on here. The other things that you're going to want to do, if PowerShell is going to be your default language, we're going to go ahead and go down to Preferences and then Settings. We're going to choose Default Language. So here's our default language. Type in PowerShell. And as soon as we do that, we're now going to be able to take a look at the JSON. So up here, open our settings. Now we can see our PowerShell ISE, and our default language is PowerShell. The other thing we can make sure we turn off is telemetry. If we don't want to send things over to Microsoft, here now I have my telemetry level set to off. If I add in a new text file, notice it is now the PowerShell icon. So I'm just going to create a comment for a new PowerShell file. So here we could see that, and if I did a file save as, I would save it as a PS1. Now that we have PowerShell extension installed in VS Code, we want to first work with our help files. So the very first thing we need to do is to update help. So when we go through and choose update help, it's going to give us a prompt to say, do you want to install the help files? And then we're going to launch those help files to pull it back up. You may see a prompt where it says, yes, do you want to? Always, no. So for this one, we're just going ahead and rerunning our update help since we had run that one time before. Sometimes you do see that there are problems with getting help files in specific items. So this time it doesn't really cause a problem here. If we needed to go back through and access that help, we could use the online. Also notice that it is mentioning a help info XML file. So the XML files for the help files are related to what Microsoft provides you. If I take a look at get-help, it's going to give me some options information here. I've always found that it's very important to use the option called show window. So here, if I did a get help, show window, it's going to pop up the Windows PowerShell. So notice here we have the blue icon. This is the Windows PowerShell 5.1 icon. The Windows PowerShell 7.x, cross-platform PowerShell, used to be called PowerShell Core, would have a black icon for it. Okay. And you could see that if you took a look at the PowerShell documentation. And when you go to what is PowerShell, by default it's going to go to the 7.5. Since we're on Windows PowerShell for the server, we want to go ahead and choose 5.1. There will be differences between what's in PowerShell 5.1 and 7. The options and the information about migrating, and then the differences between those. Key thing is PowerShell 5.1, .NET Framework, so we can use all of the .NET Framework methods and classes to expand PowerShell. And then .NET Core, now just known as .NET, allowed them to make it cross-platform. Let's go ahead and go back over to VS Code. I'm going to expand this a little bit. The first thing I need to do is determine which version of PowerShell I'm working with. This is going to be one of the built-in environment variables, $PS version table. Here I can see I'm on 5.1. Once you're inside PowerShell in VS Code, we need to start looking at our help files. We just brought up get-help, and let me zoom in here just a bit. Makes it a little bit easier to go through and show the examples. So here we have our get help, and then like I did before, get help. If I just did the basics, here I could see it all in there. If we wanted to see some examples, we could see that information, but I find it's always helpful to go through and do your show window. With the show window, if you do a -S, it'll be tab completion. If I zoom in on this just a bit, bring it up, each one of your items will have a synopsis, then you'll have a description. And then down here, notice that there are some aliases, so help and man. We will always have parameters, and then we'll see what type of parameters they are. We could see different options, and if they're positional or not. We will see some that are positional a little bit later on. If I wanted to see my screen a little bit easier, I could use clear-history, and then I could do clear-host. So the clear-history got rid of all of my history, but VS Code has that history in its own directory. So we'll be able to go back and take a look at it. But when I go ahead and do a get history here, notice that it's blank other than the ones that I just did. I can use the wildcards with the help. So if I do an asterisk -help, then it gives me back the list of items that are related to this. Now I'm going to go ahead and choose get-help, and I know there are a number of very useful about files. Notice that there are a lot of them here. You'll want to go through and look at these, especially when it comes to objects. We'll cover that in a later session. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and focus on just some services. So if I do get-help-service, I have a get, new, restart, resume, set, start, stop, suspend. In Windows PowerShell 5.1, we do not have a remove service. That is available in PowerShell 7.x though. If we wanted to remove a service, there are some additional things we could use, sc commands, etc. But we're not going to cover that right now. So when it comes to looking at one of these items, what I want to look at right now is just the get-service. This also shows us the verb-noun, and these are going to be singular. So we have a get, a new, resume, a set, start, your typical operations. So let me do a get-help, and then do a get. If I do a -s, notice my tab completion. I've got a long way to go. So I need to provide enough characters that I don't have to keep tabbing. It remembered my Zoom preferences. So I have my synopsis. It gets it on a local or remote computer. So there are going to be some items with -computer name. Is it required? No. If it's not specified, the default is going to be the local computer. Each one of these, we have the options. Is it named? Is it positional? Does it accept pipeline input? We'll come back to that at a later time, but that's how we can pipe things over. If there are some dependencies, and then the display name. So we have both a display name and then we have a name. That will depend upon what is being shown for that service. We also have excludes and includes. That gets us to our guideline of filter left and format right. I'm going to put that in my first comment here. I'm going to make this a multi-line comment. Now with PowerShell, there are some comments. So what I just did is I toggled the block comment, Control-Shift-A. You can change that in your key bindings later on. So for myself, I use a format like this instead of the defaults. If I go up to my line comment, you can either do that or you can just use a pound sign. Let me get rid of those up there. And my first guideline is filter left and then format right. So this is my pipe symbol, and that's how I'm going to be piping from one object to another. Let's take a look at the service again here. So my excludes or an include. This will allow you to then qualify the name parameter. So we will use those in conjunction with each other. Are wildcards permitted? So we could see some of those yes, some of those no. Now down here at the bottom, we see name, and its position is 0. So if I do not provide any parameters, it's going to go back and give me that. Okay. So if I just did a get service, gave it no name, if I did not specify a dash name and just gave it a name without any other parameters, I'd be able to see that. Okay. Each one of these, you see the inputs and you see outputs. These are the .NET classes and methods. You could then look this up on the Microsoft documentation. Bare minimum example, get-service. Then our search string here, WMI asterisk. Notice I don't have a name specified for either of those. I can have my display name there. I can exclude this specific one. Now we're starting to get into filtering, but on something that we can't get from the get-service. In this case, we have a status variable. So this is going to be what we see on the service applet. If I go down to services here, any number of ways I can get to it. Also bring up Task Manager. So if I bring up Task Manager, I can see over here is the services info, and then I can bring up services from there. If I have details, this is where I would be able to see that full command line. We're going to talk about that when we get to WMI with the get sim instance, because there are some things that are commandlets or functions. You'll see those used interchangeably. So get service, it doesn't give us the process ID. I'm just going to do my clear host again. If I do a get-service, here I get back a list of those services and I see that state. This is the default information that Microsoft has in the XML for formatting for that. These are not the only properties that I have available to me though. So I'm going to go through and compare these properties to what I see in services. So when I look at a service, let's just choose one that we know will always be on there. Let's look at our print spooler. So we have our service name is spooler, and then our display name. We have description, the executable path, startup type, log on, recovery if there's dependencies. So that could be used with get service as well. I'm going to then only look at get-service, and I'm going to choose a spooler service. So I could just do spool asterisk. So right now I've got spooler. If I wanted to see the properties that are available to me, what I do is use another commandlet called get-member. So when I use get-member, I can look at all of the properties that are available to it. So now I've got this specific service. Then I'm going to pipe it over to get-member. Get-member shows me that it is a service controller, like we saw in the help file. Here are the options that we see. Notice there's names, there's aliases. There are some standard methods that are in here that can be applied. Notice there's some start and stops. Then we have the properties. So I see my service name, startup type, make it to a string. I'm going to go ahead and just save this as a variable. So I'm just going to say spooler, and I could put whatever I wanted there. I'm going to be using Pascal case since that is the naming convention currently. If I look at that spooler service and do by default, I see just those variables. I have my options to format various ways. So there's my default of format table, or I could do a format list. Again, we want to make sure that we filter left and then format right. When I do that format, I could see a few more properties that are available to me. If I didn't want to see all of that, but only wanted to see specific variables and specific types, this is where I could start using the get member type. So I could do a get help. Here's my get member, and I'm going to go ahead and show that. With get member, it does give me the ability to restrict to just the properties. Down here, we can see there's the get member type. And I can pipe in any type of object, or I could give it an input object. And then here's the output that I see. So as we've been looking at, get service, get member. And then here, if we wanted to force it to get back some of the things that you don't normally see, a lot of the commandlets will have that. So I'm just going to go ahead, come back here, look at my get member, and I'm going to go ahead and say member type is an alias, everything, and I'm going to only choose my note properties. Let's see here. Go back here, take a look at our, all right, so, that's why it was coming back as nothing. I chose note property, but there is nothing that's a note property for this specific one. So instead, I'm just going to go ahead and choose property. Now I can see those. I could see the type, so some booleans, and then I see some other methods on here. Now, if I wanted to get back just the information for that first column, now I could see there's just my names for those properties. So it does make it a little bit easier to work with the service as I become more familiar. If I wanted to say all my services equals get-service, as we saw before, I don't have a status that I can filter on when I look at the help. Okay. So I can't just look at that status. Instead, I need to use the where object for some additional filtering. So I'm going to use my tab completion. Then I'm going to paste that in. Okay. Notice VS Code is going to remind me about that. Now I see those that are only running. If I wanted to further restrict, I could do some additional where objects where status is running or status equals, so those are going to be my comparison operators. And then if I wanted to say stopping, and I could see all of those. Now if I just wanted to see, I only want to see those where they're at a stopping state. Well, there are none there. So I don't have to understand everything right now when it comes to my services. If I then wanted to take this and say, only show me my running services and keep those back where my object equals running. Let's say I wanted to make sure, hey, am I really getting the same type of object when I do this? So in this case, yes, I'm still getting that same object where I come back. If I only wanted to get back specific properties, then this is where I could use my select object. So now I'm going to say for these running services, I only want to get back a few of those properties. So I need to know what those properties are ahead of time, because it's not going to allow me to basically just tab complete in here like I have on some other ones. So I'm going to say my service name, my display name, my startup type, and then my status. Now I can see all of those. If I only cared about those specific services, now let me say selected services with the properties. So here we now have my running services. If I look again at that, now I still have my service controller. I've just restricted it to a couple of those items. Let's look at our format list. And then we can see all of those right there, one by one, whereas with the table, I could see it this way. Let's take a look at some other very useful commandlets. So let's just take a look at get help, and let's do format asterisk. Notice there's what we've been using, list and table. If I wanted to go through and look at it format wide, doesn't really give us too much more on this one. Let's take a look at some of the commands that allow me to convert. Quite a few. Some things that you're often going to be using. Convert to CSV. If you need to just work with a string. Convert to JSON. And we could see convert from, secure string to, there's a string, convert from, CSV, convert from JSON. Notice there's not a convert from XML. There are some additional ways we'd need to work with that. Now, let's look at some of our other functions. Here we have export. So export CSV, very widely used. So that one's going to allow us to put it to a file. If we look at our imports, you would expect to see our imports very similar to our exports. And you can see that there are quite a few of those as well. Let's take a look at ones that might be useful if we're working with a file system. So here we have a get path, and we'll be using some of those. So the test path is going to allow us to check to see if a directory or a file is already running. So if I do a test-path, this is going to give me a true or false. A lot of times what I do is I use JJK, my initials, up front, and then when I'm doing nopes, that's how I will do my if-else's in there. So for the next thing, I could use a basic if-else. So if it exists, then yes, otherwise nope. In this case, I do get nope. If that directory didn't exist, how would I create it? Well, there is actually a commandlet for that. And on this one, if I look at my items, see working with a lot of different things. There's my get item. So if I did a get-help on get-item, that would allow me to get information, and then I had a get child item. So let's do the new item. And what I want to do, nope, notice there, I had an asterisk instead of my show window. Here is now my new item. There's a lot of different things. It's not just for directories. There are a number of different things in here. So on this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose my item type of a directory. And you can see those different outputs. Here, if I wanted to create a file in that directory, the directory already exists. And then here, if I wanted to create that, notice I can give it my path, a name, and then I would also give it that item type. On this case, if that directory didn't exist, let's say that I now want to create it. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to do my new -item, then I'm going to do an item type. I can tab through that, so there's my directory, and then here I'm going to go ahead and give it my path. So if I gave it just my path here, I'm going to have a problem because I'm not giving it the parameters that it really wants. Oh, but wait, I actually am. So I didn't have to go through and give it a name on there along with it, but if I just tried to do a name by itself here, notice there it errors out because my name isn't the right format. I would need to have my path and my name. Then here, given its path format's not supported, we could see here what line it's at and then which character. And down here, we see that exact exception. Most times, you're not wanting to use a hard-coded string. Instead, here, there's my output directory name. And now I can go through and start testing that path instead. So there I could see my true. Now, if I go through, if it exists, yes. Otherwise, I'm going to create it. Now, I'm going to go ahead and change this to be jjk_py. Actually, let me do all lowercase in case I'm doing Python. That way, I make sure I remind myself that it could be cross-platform on here. And if I now search, notice that one's not there. I'm going to go ahead and now create it. When I create it, it does give me back some output. So if I didn't want to see that output, and I wanted to then create a directory called PS, and then I'm going to go ahead and do bin, and then drafts, because that's typically how I go through and do things. I'm going to create a new one here, just called my PS, and this one I'm going to do for history, so that I could store back my history. Now, it's going to create that directory, but I don't want it to display the output. So I'm going to send it to out-null. We'll look at some other out commands. If I now go through here, do my test path, I can see that is true. And let's look at what that output directory name was. I'm going to go back just a few. So if I say here's my directory name, and I want to get back information on that. So there I could see, yes, that is my name. if I wanted to say, instead of just that item, do a get child item, then I could bring that up as well. One thing that you're going to be using quite a bit as well, it's going to be your join path command. And let's have some information that we can take a look at for that. So if I go back to my history, there I go through, and let me see, what was the name for my, there we go, I've got my selected service properties. So I'm going to bring that back down here. Okay. I'm going to first test out something. I'm going to say convert to CSV. Notice I have all of my strings there. And at the very top, I do have a type. Most times you're not going to be working with just a convert to CSV unless you need it as a body to send to the next API call, not likely there, or to the next inline process. Instead, what you're going to be doing most times is exporting it to a CSV file. So if I look here, get help export CSV, I'm just going to close some of these other ones. So here's my export CSV. Override is going to be the default. Okay. Notice without the append, it's going to replace it without warning. Okay. If we need a special delimiter, if we need an encoding, we could see those encoding options. If it's read-only, I can use force. My input object, I can use that, or I can then just pass it along via the pipeline. Literal path, no clobber, okay. It doesn't overwrite an existing file. No type information. So this is going to prevent this type info at the very top from appearing. Sometimes we don't want to see that, but in this case it does show us the .NET type. It is in there. Okay. And then the path, so that is a required parameter, and it's positional for position 0. What do I want to do with this list? I'm going to go ahead and export it. But what I first want to do, I'm going to go ahead and create a new directory. So here's my output directory name. I'm just going to say CSV here. Actually, I'm just going to call this output. Okay. And then here, let's go back up. And okay. Right. So it already exists on there. So now for my CSV full file name, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use join path, and I'm going to say first my output directory name, and then I'm going to give it a string. This is going to be my file1.csv. If I take a look at that CSV full file name, here I have that. Now instead of convert to CSV, I'm going to go ahead and do my export CSV, and now I'm going to go ahead and give it that CSV file name. It's created it. If I go over to my file system, there's my output. Let me go ahead and choose to show my file extensions. Go ahead and associate this with Notepad++. You got to make sure you choose that always. And then look for another app the first time you're working with it. Right. And now there we go. So I do see that type information. So I don't want to see that type information. So I'm going to go up, go ahead and choose no type information. it completely overwrote that file because I didn't choose append. But I could see that up at the very top now. If I didn't want to see it in a CSV file, but instead wanted to start working with JSON, you go ahead and create a new file name. So I'm going to go ahead and choose this as JSON full file name. Call this file2.json. Let's take my selected service, and I'm going to go ahead and use my convert to JSON. So now I have that string, and it is a fully qualified. I don't have an export JSON, so what I need to do now is actually send this to out file, and then I'm going to go ahead and send it to my JSON full file name. Because VS Code can understand JSON and then reformat it, I'm going to go take a look. There's my file2.json. Hey, it's in a different directory. Do I want to allow it in this window? And you got to be careful about remember my decision. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and choose open it and then format. Notice that it did change it up a little bit, but now I have that. Okay. If I wanted to take that information and use it again, I'm going to need to use my get content on that. And then I can take this string and then convert it from JSON. It goes to now a PS custom object. How do I know that? If I look at my get help, and let's look at both of those JSON. So if I wanted to here, go through and look at convert to JSON, and then I'm going to look at my convert from JSON. You don't have to worry about the case, but a lot of times I try to make sure my case is correct. Now I have both of those files. There's my convert to, so I can bring in any type of .NET object and then switch it over to a JSON string. Conversely, here's my convert from. Here's an example using getDate and then selecting specific properties in there. What I just did is I used a get content. You could also use the -raw on there. So the raw returns a whole file as a single JSON object. So let me go back over here and change that to that -raw, and I can convert from JSON. What type of information do I get if I do the get content? Here it is a system string. It comes back with everything, and I could see that information in here. Whereas if I did a get content here, there I'm also getting a string, but I could go through and take a look at the help file for get content, and we could see what the differences are between that raw and the regular ones. Okay. Now I can also say what my delimiter, things like that are in there. Raw ignores new line characters and returns it as a single one. Right? And notice it only works for file systems when we're going through and working with that. We've gone through and taken a look at a lot of things in this session. So what would I need to do if I wanted to save back my history so that I could use it again? Well, if I look at it that way, I have everything with the lines on there But let's say that I didn't want that. Notice here, there's my command line. I see my ID. So if I only wanted to say, get my command line, here I could see that information there. And let's go ahead and create a new file here. And that would be like if I go way, way up, and let's do this, put directory name, and instead of that, so notice I already have that, and then I'm going to say my history ps1. Actually, let me do this, history file equals join dash path, and I'm going to go ahead and give it my output directory name, and then I'm going to go ahead and call this history.ps1. I'm going to now take my get history command line, and then I'm going to go ahead and do it as out file to my history file. Go over here, my JJK, PS for my PowerShell. Notice there was a PowerShell icon. You can go ahead and associate that with Notepad++ as well, just to be on the safe side. And there's all of my history. Now let me go ahead and bring that up in VS Code. And there I have everything that I worked with before. Notice here I could see a problem. Wait a minute, saying, hey, I used a variable, but I never actually used that. So I created it, but never used it. So now if I just do my F8, there I can see that name. If I don't really want to work with that, but I don't want to get this error, I would just need to do my alt-null. Now I can save that history, and if I needed to pull back things later on, I could do that. This concludes the first session of Power Up with PowerShell from the OWASP Houston Chapter Study Group.